Welcome back to another episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, the president of Dale Carnegie Training Japan. And my special guest today is Carolina Kawakubo, who's the managing director of MedSkin here in Japan. Welcome to the show.
Nice to be here.
Thank you. Well, I'm particularly happy to have you as my guest because I've done about 20 or so of these interviews so far and no ladies.
Wow.
Which is really shocking indictment of me and perhaps the leadership element of ladies in this leadership positions in Japan. So I'm really pleased to have you here because I want to explore some aspects of that which may be different from a man's experience particularly. But let's start with a little bit of background on yourself. Why are you in Japan? Why have you got a Japanese surname? Why are you running MedSkin here in Japan?
Yeah.
And just fill us in on what's been happening for you to get you to this point in your career.
Sure. So I'm originally from Germany, and I had this interest in Japan since I was a teenager.
Oh, why was that?
Well, this is already now 25 years back. So at that time, Japan was still in the news because of the bubble bursting, and it was still a little bit like China nowadays, and really economic powerhouse, which was in that decline at that point of time already. But it was just a lot in the media. And I just found it quite fascinating because in many ways, the country and the culture is so different from the European one. And at that point of time, it was maybe even more exotic because you couldn't really go on the internet and watch a YouTube video. So I would actually have to go to the library and check out books. And it was just this really fascinating, exotic place to me.
Sort of still mysterious Japan.
Mysterious Japan, exactly. And I was actually playing around with the thought of doing something like Japanese sciences at university. But I talked to many people and most told me, well, don't do this because the jobs you can do afterwards just with Japanese language are very limited. So I thought, I'm going to combine it with business, which is why I studied business administration. And during my studies, I went to Japan already for 1 year, studied here at the Keio University.
Was that a university exchange? Or you got a scholarship, or how did that work?
Well, actually, I went to the Japanese studies department and I said, I really want to go. And they said, well, do you speak Japanese? And I said, well, I kind of studied on my own. I did classes during high school already. And they said, well, this is a very unusual case, but we're going to see what we can do. And they really helped me arrange that exchange because Keio used to be our partner university from Dusseldorf. So I didn't have to pay tuition. And the good thing about the German system is it's quite affordable. So you just have to pay for your living expenses.
So which German university?
Heine University of Dusseldorf.
Right.
Dusseldorf. Yeah, and I already knew that I want to go back to Japan. And then I got the offer just before graduating to actually do my PhD. And I was kind of thinking what to do because it's another couple of years. But on the other hand, Germany in particular is also a very title-driven society, So I had a really good offer from a professor who I worked for before. So I thought, again, I'm going to combine the both. And I wrote about Western companies in Japan and how they're implementing their CSR, corporate social responsibility. And for that research, actually, I went to Japan and I interviewed different kinds of European companies and their presidents. And one of them was Henkel. And they talked to me and said, well, somebody like you with your background with business studies and Japanese, we could always, use in our company. What do you think about working here? And in that sense, I was really lucky that I got my first job without even going through a complicated application process.
So you got to finish the PhD, or they took you beforehand?
Well, we did an arrangement where for the first year, I got 1 day off in the week to finish my PhD, and I already joined the company. So I did both for a year. And then
this is Henkel in Germany or
in
here?
Japan already.
Oh, in Japan.
So I started for Henkel in Japan.
It must have been a bit of a nightmare trying to finish a PhD off on 1 day a week and the weekend.
Well, I was already quite far along and it was just finishing up, so it was doable. And I was glad because I had this goal in mind. And I think actually a lot of times the problem with PhDs not finishing is the time management. If you have the whole week you will always postpone for tomorrow. And if you only have one day in the week, you know that you have to sit down and get things done. So in a way, maybe it was good, because I know many PhD students in Germany who never finish because they always have another year, another week. So
how many years did it take you to finish the PhD then?
In total, let's see, it was a little bit more than 3.5 years. So I was,
Not bad. It took me 5 to do mine.
Usually it takes longer.
Yeah, you did well, actually. Well done to you. I should have been more like you.
And that's why I joined Henkel as my first job. And there I was doing marketing for the Pritt stick. It's like glue stick product. Henkel, I'm not sure if you're aware of the company. It's a big chemical producer, and they mostly in Japan are doing business in automotive. So there are actually 7 kilos of adhesives in just one car. So it's a huge market. But I was in the consumer adhesives, so just for like stationary products. And we would actually produce those products in Germany and have a Japanese partner here in Japan to which we sold and then distributed. So that was a great job to start in Japan as well, because I was very much on the interface of the German headquarters and the local Japanese customers and learned about, the differences in thinking. And
What were those differences in thinking that you bumped into?
We'll go into this afterwards, I think a little bit more in depth. But, the classical ones, like first of all, Japan or the Japanese customers often want to have something very specific, which you can only sell in Japan. So in our case, they would say, we don't like the product being that big. We want to have a little bit of glitter in it and a little bit cuter and a little bit sweeter. And I understand that, of course, the Japanese customer will respond to different kinds of aesthetics than the European ones. But when I bring those plans back to the headquarters, they would often go through the financials and say, well, Japan is simply not big enough for us to completely change our production process. Because some things you can do, you can maybe change a label or adjust the color. But if it's a little bit more extensive, for many companies, it's simply not financially feasible because it's not a market like the Chinese one, where you can develop a completely new model, at least in many cases. So this was the first challenge. And the second one, I think, is a classical one, just the quality expectations. Because I would say that most German companies, they already have a very high level of quality, but they understand that 100% quality is usually not feasible.
Or it's feasible, but comes at a very big cost.
Exactly.
So the cost
Yes.
quality ratio is always a consideration.
Yes. So if you want to run your business effectively, usually you have maybe 1-2% of products that are not 100%. So the Japanese customer would actually come back to us with like single pieces of glue stick and say, look at this one. We have a scratch here on the surface. And this told me a lot about, how the Japanese clients are thinking. Yeah.
Okay, so Henkel, how long were you at Henkel?
I was with Henkel for 3 years.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And then what happens?
And then at that time, I was still kind of considering maybe going back to academia, going back to university. And by chance, I actually got an offer to start in Beijing. Yeah.
With who?
With Beijing University.
Oh, okay.
So it's Beijing Normal University, and they have an MBA program completely taught in English.
All right.
And that, for me, was a good fit because MBAs, they're looking for different kinds of teaching. They want to have people who actually have some experience, not only, teach the textbooks. And at that time, actually, I was also interested just in learning about China because nowadays, if you look at East Asian economics, of course, Japan is important, but China is also just a game changer. So I thought it's important to get to know that country. And I accepted that job offer, and I lived in Beijing for another 2.5, almost 3 years, teaching the MBA to the local Chinese people.
And what were they like as students? I went to Japanese university.
Yes.
So I have a bit of an insight into what Japanese universities are like, but how are Chinese university students?
Completely different.
Always different?
Yeah, because I did some teaching in Japan once in a while, when professor invites me to do a seminar or whatever. So I have to say I have a lot of respect for Chinese students because for them, getting Western education really can change their life. They can get like completely different jobs if they speak English well and if they know how the Western managers think. So they have really a hunger for knowledge. And, I think both in Japan and in Germany, in a way, we're already satisfied. Our young people are not quite as ambitious anymore. So if you are the professor, it's often more about keeping them awake and motivated. And in China, I mostly wouldn't have that problem. I mean, of course, you always have some lazy people, but overall, I have to say, the students are really, really highly motivated and hungry to learn. And they were very much interested in also learning from me as a foreigner versus their Chinese professors. And what I find really fascinating was also they are extremely critical also. They actually question what you say because, I mean, teaching in Japan, you know what I'm talking about. The Japanese people, if they ask a question, it's more about, could you explain a bit more closely what you mean with that sentence? They don't really question your idea in the fundamentals. So I found that refreshing, that you have like really smart, motivated students who are really engaged in the classroom. So I would say as a teacher or professor, at least, the program that I taught was a very good group of people. So yeah, that was an interesting experience as well.
And do you still keep in touch with any of those high-flying, upwardly mobile, hungry Chinese MBAs?
I do have some connections, of course, that I still maintain. But, on the other hand, I also have to admit that overall living in Japan still is in very many ways much more comfortable because the universities, I think they're really putting lots of also investments now into growing and in coming to the Western standard. But as soon as you leave campus, you can see it's still by far not as developed. And many things in the infrastructure are not working. I remember I had this heating system in my apartment, which you actually had to preload with money. So if you forgot to recharge that heating system in the middle of the night, you don't have any heating anymore. And things like that, So for living your entire life, I have to say coming back to Japan now is in many ways much easier, not to mention the pollution. But, having said that, I would say that a couple of years in China are definitely eye-opening to also learn about that civilization, because I always had the impression that China is not only a different country, it's really a different civilization. Because you turn on the TV, you don't know anybody. They have like their complete own media, their own, historical background, which unfortunately we in the West are really not educated about. So in a way, I have a big respect also for the Chinese that they know much more about us than we do about them.
Did you learn any Chinese, any putonghua?
Yes, I tried, of course. My original goal was to become fluent in Chinese as well, but I'm okay with the characters because this is quite similar to Japanese, but the pronunciation just killed me. The Chinese pronunciation, they have those tones.
Yeah, 4 tones, right?
And if you make a mistake with the tone, people don't understand you. So it's extremely frustrating as a learner. Plus, at that point, I already saw that I'm probably not going to spend the next 20 years in the country. So the motivation of really sitting down and learning is not as high anymore.
So how did you get back to Japan?
Yeah, and then the funny thing was I got back in touch with my now husband, who used to be a friend of mine for many years already. But he came see me in Beijing, and we got together and we decided that we want to get married. At that time, though, he was already in the States. So my husband, he's doing research at Harvard University. And, we decided we want to live together in some place. And the next couple of years, I kind of split up my time between Japan and the States because from the working visa, it was a little bit complicated that sometimes I could live in the States but not work. So I could not really be in Boston for a long time until we had our green card. So for the next couple of years, I was mostly working freelance and for different companies doing the international marketing. And I also had 2 kids. And this,
you've been a very, very busy lady.
Yes, very international, because we actually now spanning 3 different continents, he in the States and me from Germany, and now with Japan, the combination, it's very global. Yeah, and this was until last summer. And at that time, I was already thinking that I really want to go back to Japan, also for our kids, because I want them to grow up in one educational system. And them being Japanese, I think it's important that they learn the proper language, and including the kanji.
How old are your children?
The older one is 2.5, and the younger one is 1.5.
Okay. So what language do you speak to the children in?
I speak only German.
Good.
Yeah, yeah.
Good. Yeah. Because with my son, from when he was born, I've only spoken him in English, and his mother's spoken him in Japanese.
Yes.
So he's really bilingual today as a result of that. I mean,
Yeah.
he's been up and down through international school, Japanese school. You know, we've mucked him around a lot, but that's a great policy, I think.
Yeah.
Ultimately, your kids will be bilingual, at least bilingual, probably trilingual, because you throw English in there.
I hope so.
Great. That's a really
Yeah.
great start to their
Yeah,
careers.
yeah.
Excellent.
And I think that both the US system and the Japanese system have their good and bad points, but it's probably easier to switch from the Japanese system to the Western system. And I thought for the kids it would be easier to get the start in the Japanese system to get a good basis of the language. And then when they're a little bit older, you know, for high school, university, they can always go to like an English-speaking or German-speaking environment. Plus, I got the offer from my current company, which was
How
really
did that
attractive.
come out? Here you are, you're freelancing, you're running
Yeah.
around between, Boston and
Yeah.
Tokyo and Dusseldorf probably. So how does that come about?
Well, I have to say I was really lucky because the German Chamber of Commerce, they have a website where they feature job offers from German companies. And I always thought that where I could make the biggest contribution would be a German company in Japan because of the language and, the cultural background. And they were looking for like a general manager, and I thought, this is something that I could do.
Did they have an existing operation in Japan, or are you starting the operation in Japan?
No, they already had the office there for more than 10 years already. And it's a small team, but the previous general manager quit because of health issues. So
they've been, as a small office, they're basically working through Japanese distributors, and you're taking care of the distributors?
Mostly distributors, yeah. I mean, there are some customers that are getting served directly because we also do OEM products. But yeah, a bulk of the business is done with dealers and distributors.
And what sort of products are they doing?
So the company itself has basically two product lines. So the original product that the company has been established upon is collagen sheets as a thermal template. So if for some...
So explain that to the...
Okay, so for...
The layman here. What's
Yeah.
the collagen thermal
So
sheet?
this
What does
means
that mean?
if you have a surgery where skin has to be replaced.
Like a skin graft or something
Exactly.
like that. Mm.
Yeah, the traditional or the classical way is just to take some skin from another place from your body and then put it on there. But that brings a lot of disadvantages because you have another big wound on your leg or wherever you take the skin from. So our company developed basically a skin substitute that you could put on that wound, and you would only have to place like a very thin layer of the dermis on top, so you could heal like a large wound and replace that skin. So this is the basic product line that the company started from. Unfortunately, in Japan, the medical licenses and the registrations are so complex and so expensive that in Japan, we are not having that product yet. I mean, I'm working now on seeing how we could get that to Japan, but the Japanese medical market is quite difficult, especially if you don't have like millions to throw around for this kind of registration.
That's interesting because I remember that anything in that regulatory area was always a nightmare in Japan.
Yes.
And one of the things under the Abe cabinet that they did was to speed up considerably, particularly on pharma, getting drugs to market. Like it used to be just laborious getting through the procedures, and you'd take years to get to market. but they really sped it up. But for your area, it doesn't sound like that's been working for you.
Not really, especially our product is considered to be an implant. So implants are especially difficult because you have to go through clinical tests and things like that.
And Japanese skin is different, of course.
Well, yes. So they always say, of course, even though you have the tests from Europe, it doesn't necessarily apply to the Japanese clients. And yeah, I mean, we are still looking at some options to get it registered, maybe through a partner. But in the moment, in Japan, we're not with this product. However, the company has a second pillar of products, which we have both in Europe and in Japan, which is skincare products for like cosmetic use. And this is our bread and butter in Japan. And mostly what we are working with is collagen masks for cabin use, like beauty salons, but also like high-level anti-aging cosmetics with different kinds of ingredients, which are produced in a very specific way, which we call the cryo-set method. So basically, we take out the water of, for instance, collagen over weeks and weeks with like a very complicated process. So you can reactivate that collagen when you actually use it on the skin. And this business is going really well.
It's obviously working, and you would be an excellent ambassador for the product because your skin's in beautiful condition, I have to say. Well done. You've got to represent the product, right?
It seems to work,
You've got to represent the product,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
So when they were considering you for this job, was there ever a conversation around the fact that I'm presuming the previous general manager who retired was probably a man?
Exactly.
And here you are, you're youngish, I don't know how old you are, but youngish, German woman who's going to take over in what I'm guessing is a pretty conservative industry. Yeah. Was there ever a discussion about that with you?
Yes.
Well, how did that conversation go?
Well, they asked me straight away. They said, well, having worked in Japan, you're probably aware of, the Japanese business environment. How do you feel about this, going into this position as a lady? Especially also because my employees are actually also men, and they are older than me. And, well, I said that I personally think it's more about bringing in new ideas and actually performing and bringing in the business. And, of course, in a way, I'm also lucky that my industry, 99% of the clients tend to be women. So in a way, it's also easier sometimes to present the product convincingly because you can talk from your own experience. So I think this has played a role.
And has that worked out? I mean, you mentioned that in the interview, having not taken the job.
Yeah.
So you take the job,
yeah,
and now you're dealing with the clients, and you're turning up. And has that actually proved to be the case?
I would say that besides of a couple of interested looks from some clients that were surprised, so far it's going really well.
So interested looks means you company applies for the meeting, your Japanese staff organise the meeting, you walk in the door and everyone goes, whoa, hang on a minute, who's this tall foreigner?
Well, I think the clients that were most surprised were those that already knew us for a couple of years because they knew my predecessors, and then suddenly there comes this rather youngish woman from Germany, and I think they were just surprised by that choice from the company. But all the new customers, they seem to be rather positively surprised. And in a way, if you are like a European company, if you have some European representing it, it's not necessarily a disadvantage.
And also, as you say, I mean, 90% of the market is for ladies.
Yes.
So
exactly.
It's a good fit.
Yeah.
So what about, for anyone taking over an existing business with staff that you didn't hire, who've been loyal to a previous boss who left for health reasons, not because of poor performance or any dispute with the company, and they've got long experience in the business, and this young person, be it male or female, in this case it's female, turns up as their boss. So how old are they, and what was sort of intriguing and interesting for you to be the boss with some older Japanese men?
Well, I have to say my employees welcomed me very warmly. I mean, before coming to the office, I was also concerned, whether that might be an issue. I think I'm lucky because they already worked for that company for a couple of years, so they are used to our leadership from Germany, who also, by the way, is female. So our president is a lady, and my boss is a lady. So it's not the first time that their superiors are female. So in that sense, I have to say, there was not a problem that they wouldn't respect me or anything like that.
Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. Let's talk about then just general leadership. You come in. What was different for you? You're in a leadership role, really, I guess, for the first time, because you've been freelancing.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different to being
Yes.
P&L responsibility,
Yeah.
HR responsibility, representing the brand responsibility. So what were things that you found? I mean, you knew Japan, but being the boss in Japan is a bit different to just being in Japan.
Yes.
What were some of the differences you found as being a leader in Japan?
Well, as you say, you have to tackle different kinds of challenges. Because if you work for yourself, you only have to manage yourself. And your responsibility also only extends about your own projects. So now there's definitely much more complexity in my day. And in a way, I think, like with Henkel also, the biggest challenge is always making both your team and your Japanese clients and the German headquarter happy. Because
How do you do that?
Well, this is the key question, I think. There is not like one easy solution. I guess what helps is to understand both perspectives. Coming from Germany, I know where they're coming from, and of course, the headquarters is looking at different kinds of indicators than maybe, your Japanese staff. So it's always about the art of the possible, I think you have to both explain to the headquarters what's feasible in Japan so they can manage their expectations, and at the same time, also communicate to your local team and to your Japanese clients that you might not function completely like a Japanese company. And, in a way, sometimes it can work for you also, because...
What would be an example of that?
For instance, the whole question about quality management. I'm not sure if what our Japanese clients are telling us is always 100% correct, but the expectation is, if you're a Japanese supplier, that you comply to this 100% of quality standard. And if they want to get the prices at the current level, they have to accept that this is not feasible if products are coming from Europe. I mean, we are not talking about, like bad products, but for instance, that our boxes sometimes have a little bit of a tear or something, then we have to talk with the Japanese customer what we can do about this. Of course, we're always happy to compromise and to help them out, but it always comes with a price. So I think finding that compromise where you can give the customer a product that they are happy with at a price that is still feasible, that is a big part of my job.
It's interesting on that part. I remember years ago I visited a Mitsubishi car factory in Japan and being shown around the plant by the plant manager. And these were bodies at this stage. They hadn't had the engines put in. And just on a piece of A4 with a bit of sticky tape, it had in Japanese, Chugoku, had China written on the car. And this is quite a few years ago. And I said to the plant manager, why has that car got that on there? He said, because that car is going to China. And that car is going to be an ambassador for us to crack that market. And all the workers are going to make a special job to make that perfect so that when it goes in the Chinese market, we're going to succeed. That was the mentality. So what I was thinking was, how do we get headquarters, someone in headquarters, when they're packing the box or they're organising the product, to know this is going to Japan, and we're going to enter that market here, we're going to expand that market here, so we're just going to take that little bit of extra care on the wrapping or the packing or the handling. You know, that Japanese mentality really struck me, that we're going to, all the workers were thinking, yes, that's an ambassador product into a new market for us, we're going to be especially careful. How do we get that in our companies to think about that for the Japanese market? Just as an aside. So it's an interesting problem, isn't it?
Yeah. And actually, you know, in our German factory, we also educate the employees about those Japanese quality expectations.
Do you go back yourself and talk to them about that?
Well, I haven't done it personally, but this has been done by also my predecessors, that they talked up to them about this kind of cultural differences. But, you know, having said that, there are always some things that you cannot completely control. Maybe even in the transport, you know, just the shipping from Europe sometimes causes some boxes to break. So you have no 100% control about the whole process. But we are already trying to come as close to the Japanese expectations as we can.
Okay, so in terms of thinking about, well, you've got a small team.
Yes.
So it's easy to manage a small team's engagement because you know straight away if someone's not engaged or not. Yeah. But do you have anything particularly that you do to encourage your team to be more engaged in what they're doing? And I'm thinking about that along the lines of what you mentioned before of the art of the possible. Yeah. Because Japan can very much be, look, this is how we do things around here. We're good at what we do now. Let's not stray out of the boundaries of things. Let's stick with the ordinary every day and keep doing that extremely well and do a kaizen on that as opposed to a big jump. Yeah. So how do you engage people to go beyond the everyday to think about what's possible?
Well, first of all, I think when we talk about engagement, it's seen very differently in Japan than in the West.
For example?
Because in the West, the ideal engaged employee is somebody who is bringing new ideas, pushing forward innovation, coming into the office smiling, being a little bit extroverted, being the team player. So this is the Western ideal of a good employee, right? And I think the Japanese, when they think about a good employee, it's about somebody who is extremely dedicated to their one task that they do. So it all comes from, you know, this Zen Buddhist ideal of doing the same task over and over and over again, 10,000 times until you have mastered it to perfection. And at the same time, not giving up, you know, maybe doing the same task for 10 or 20 years. And
although when I think about, and I know nothing about Germany, let's just put that on the table, but you have a Meister tradition. You know, you talk about monozukuri, making things. You know, Germany has a long Meister tradition going right back to the guilds in the Middle Ages of that same dedication to a task. Whatever you're making, you make that extremely well and you pass it on generation to generation. So I'm thinking there must be some perhaps greater similarity. Perhaps my own country, Australia, we don't have that necessarily, that Meister idea. But I'm just wondering whether there's some similarity there.
Oh, definitely. I think actually as a German living in Japan, of course you have cultural differences, but you have a lot of similarities. You know, this whole idea of dedication and punctuality and being precise. So yeah, we definitely do have that. And I think also maybe the German employees are not quite as outgoing as maybe some people from the Anglo-Saxon world. So, seeing those differences, I think it's probably not possible to make especially an older Japanese employee completely change to like this westernized, open-minded, extroverted person.
So what do you do then about getting innovation?
Yeah, so for innovation, I would say it's interesting in Japan because if you look at Japan as a country, it's largely considered to be quite innovative. But the innovation comes from things and not from social change. And there's the saying that Europeans like old things and new ideas, and the Japanese, they like old ideas and new things.
I've never heard that before, actually, said like that, but that's very, very good insight.
And I think this is so true.
I mean, you think about it. I go to Europe to admire the ancient architecture.
Yes.
You know, Paris or Rome or something like that, you know, it's got that tradition. And yes, we're open to new concepts, but Japan, they destroy all their buildings and replace them all the time and keep, except for temples, but even temples, they completely replace them. So very interesting insight.
So I think if you're looking at innovation in products or like technical processes, that's actually quite easy to come by, because you have a lot of Japanese companies also who come up with new things. The real challenge is in social processes and in social values. And I think that in Japan just takes a long, long time. And all the foreigners, when they come to Japan, what they are getting most frustrated about is this: when they first are here, what they see is the innovation and the newness on the surface. So Tokyo looks like an extremely high-tech modern city. But if you live here, you start to see that under that surface, society, in many ways, still follows values that are like 50, 60 years behind from what you would find in, North America or Europe.
Well, Confucian values are still very much in place here. And as you say before, Buddhist values are still very much in place here.
Yes. So I personally find that changing that kind of social ideas, that is a big challenge. And, for my team, so far, I didn't really have to implement a lot of, social different changes now. But what I've seen with other companies working is that I think you will have to bring in an outsider. So in a way, what they do now with me in my company, like if you bring in like a young foreigner, it's much easier to spread out a new idea than having that done in a team that consists of Japanese employees who've been there for 30, 40 years. So you have to have somebody who is already familiar with a different kind of context. But that's, of course, not necessarily possible in every company.
And I guess also when you've been in that Japanese bubble for a long time, groupthink, and there's also certain restrictions, social restrictions, relationship restrictions, that prevent you from thinking outside of that bubble. Whereas in your case, you're making an omelette here, you're going to break a few eggs, and you're happy to do that. Whereas the Japanese would say, we're not going to break any eggs. Right?
Yes. And, in a way, there's also the gaijin benefit,
What's the gaijin benefit?
The gaijin benefit, if I show up at the customer and I do a small social faux pas, then I think they will not be quite as offended if a Japanese people, would do the same thing. So I'm not saying that I exploit that, but, sometimes it helps to bring in new ideas if it comes from that foreigner, because they are more forgiving. And, in my experience, Japanese people are also quite interested in hearing about, how are things done in Europe or North America. And when it comes from somebody who's from those places, it gives them more credibility.
And just as a matter of interest, do you mention the fact that you have a Japanese husband, that you have kids here? Yeah. Do you ever bring that up in the sort of short, form conversation at the beginning, the chit-chat? Does that ever sort of pop up?
Well, it automatically comes up as soon as I give them my business card, because I have a Japanese last name. And then they check my face like, oh, is she mixed or is she married maybe to a Japanese husband? And usually they ask. And then I tell them. And, of course, that also gives more trust because it shows a dedication to that country. And
showing your commitment.
Yes.
The fact that you got, a Japanese surname and husband, kids here, you're not going to be on a posting for 3 years and then, move on to the next posting. You're here for the duration, presumably. So that's, again, where they look for the long term. They see in you someone who's going to be the long term. So that must also give them some comfort.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, very good. So in terms of, let's talk about trust, building trust, be it trust with your own staff, be it trust with the buyers, your own clients. What have you found works in building trust in Japan?
Well, first of all, you need time. Japanese people, they need time to warm up to you and to develop that relationship.
Now that's great in theory, you know,
Yeah.
like if you've got, Germany may be a bit
Yeah.
better than America in this sense, because America is very much shareholder value driven, you know, and speed to market, and we got to get that revenue up, and we want to see profits, and we're not prepared to lose money over long. You've got all that driving you to not have patience, to not take time. So how do you balance out that sort of headquarter push? And maybe Germany's not as bad as America, but still, how do you balance that out?
Well, I think it goes both ways. You also have to talk to the headquarter and manage the expectations there. In my company, I'm lucky that they already have a long relationship with Japan, so they already know some of the restrictions. And at the same time, you know, there are some things that you can do to speed it up a little bit. What I think works well in Japan is if you see the client in person regularly. What surprised me in North America was that I worked with some companies that I never met. I mean, everything was done over email or Skype or telephone. So American clients are very happy, you know, as long as you can show that you know, give performance, to not even meet you ever. And in Japan, that doesn't work. I think you really have to go sit with the client. And you also have to take the client out of the office. Because I find that a lot of Japanese people are quite reserved when they have this formal setting. And, you know, just taking them out for dinner sometimes, or, you know, talking with them not in that typical business setting helps to warm them up and get to know you as a person. And that also, I think, stabilizes the relationship.
I'm going to ask a very
Yeah.
controversial thing now, because, you know, this is a very male-dominated
Yeah.
society. Being invited out to dinner by a very attractive, tall, youngish young woman from Germany, as a Japanese man, I might get the wrong impression about what this evening is going to involve. So do you ever get that little bit of confusion on their part about why we're doing this and where we're going with this?
Until now, it was never me and one client. So I probably would avoid that, because you're right, you know, that might give the wrong impression. If I had to bet a client, maybe just one-on-one, I would maybe choose a lunch and not necessarily a dinner. But, you know, sometimes when they had a couple of drinks, you get a couple of comments, which might not be meeting all the compliance standards that we have in many Western companies.
And what sort of comment would that be, I wonder?
Well, you know, for instance, in one of my previous jobs, I had a Japanese customer, and he was talking to me about the German sauna culture. And because in Germany, in the sauna, you know, we have mixed saunas, and we don't wear any bathing suits, so it's completely naked. And of course, you know, this is a topic that they get interested in when they're a little bit drunk. And they said, well, you know, in Germany, that must be so nice, having this kind of mixed saunas.
Like the Rotenburo here, right?
Yeah,
The mixed
yeah.
bathing in the hot springs here. Very
Yeah.
similar.
But then, you know, I just gave them contra, and I said, well, you know, I mean, you had that in Japan, but then, you know, the Americans came in and they kind of made you quit that, right? So in this kind of situation, it helps that I'm a Western woman who can respond at the same level. You know, I think I can allow myself not to be like super shy, just like, ah. So, you know, there are guys in any country that might give you some comments. You just have to be able to reply appropriately. And so far, nobody has ever been really offensive. But, you know, I think living in Japan, you also have to be careful to blame everything on Japanese culture. You know, if I was in Germany, having some drinks with colleagues, I'm sure that somebody would give me a strange comment at some point also.
Someone hitting on you.
Yeah, you know, so I think it's not necessarily a Japanese problem. It's just a human problem that you will have some people at some point that you don't get along with, or that, you know, challenge you in some ways. And yeah, at that point, I think you just have to be confident and be able to reply to them without being offensive.
So, what are the things you do to build trust with other clients or staff?
So as I said, I would say, sometimes taking them out of the office, but also I think what's really, really important is to communicating that you're not there to change Japan. Because what some foreigners are often doing when they lived here for a couple of years, they get really frustrated. And then they start gossiping about how bad all the Japanese things are and how Japan has to change. And, at the end of the day, I think we have to be aware that we are still guests in this country, even though we might live here and, we have family connections, maybe even a Japanese spouse. If I visit somebody's home, I'm also not criticizing their home so much. So I'm very, very careful what I criticize about Japan when I talk to Japanese people. And I think that has really worked for me because the Japanese really appreciate that you respect their country. And I mean, trust in the end is about respect, right? So even though I think any kind of foreigner will probably have a long list of things that they could come up with that they're very frustrated with sometimes.
What's the most frustrating thing for you then?
I would say what really frustrates me sometimes is that in some things I don't see a logic. Because the Germans maybe are very rational, very practical, and we always want to solve things with logic. But in Japan, because of a lot of cultural reasons and this kind of social networks, many things can simply not be explained by logic. And you also have to be very careful to pick your battles, because some things you will not be able to change. So distinguishing between those things that you can change and those things that you just have to accept, because this is something that the Japanese environment is all about. That can be challenging sometimes. But now I've been living in Japan in total 7 or 8 years. I come to a point where I pretty much know what is in the areas that I can have an influence on and what are things that are just things that I have to accept.
And I guess also, your spouse is Japanese, so you have an extended family here. Yeah. His parents, grandparents, perhaps, cousins, uncles, aunts, that type of thing. So you probably get a bit of a broader exposure to some really homegrown things in Japan, culturally, relationship-wise, that if you're here on a posting, you wouldn't get that exposure.
Yes.
Does that help, you find?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
What would be some things that help you there?
Well, I mean, the first thing is that it's much easier to deal with stress if you have a family here. I often find that those foreigners who have the hardest time are those who come here and don't speak the language and are assigned to a job where, they have trouble making any kind of impact. And that can be a really, really hard assignment. Just being able to go back home, but, and have kids and family here, that gives you a different dimension to your life. And I think that by itself helps. And I also see a lot of the good sides, of the Japanese culture, about, the dedication to the family. And I was welcomed very warmly by my Japanese family, actually. It definitely helps you to love Japan if you have this personal relationship.
Your children are boy, girl, both boys?
The older one is a boy, the oldest is a girl. The
So
youngest is a girl.
You're extremely well placed there to satisfy everybody, right?
Yeah, and I have to say I was also lucky in the sense that my husband has 2 older brothers who already had children. So maybe that helped them also to welcome me as a foreigner. Sometimes it's harder if it's the oldest son, for instance, who wants to marry, and then if the wife is a foreigner, of course there are different implications.
Yes, and also in terms of, you mentioned before your children are relatively young.
Yeah.
So for any woman, working woman who's got young kids, a big job, how do you manage that? How do you find, who's looking after the kids during the day? How do you do that if you're going out, even with taking your staff with you at night, with dinners with clients, travel for work, all this type of thing? How do you manage all that?
I actually have 2 live-in au pair girls from Germany. And this was actually also a question they asked me in the interview, because it is challenging and it requires a lot of management on both sides, But I found that works really well if you have somebody in your home who can show that flexibility. Because as you said, sometimes I work later in the evening. I have a business trip. I also have business trips abroad where I'm maybe not home for a couple of days. And I started out with actually 1 girl, but I found out that it's too much for just 1 girl to take care of the kids the whole day, because it's a long day. And now we split it up with 2. And they're here with the working holiday visa. So for them, it's a good opportunity to stay here in Tokyo for 1 year. And they are, have the opportunity to also take some language classes at the same time. And they take really good care of my kids. But, when I tell the scenario to my Japanese friends, they look at me like I'm completely crazy. Because I think for a typical Japanese, first of all, outsourcing your childcare is a complete no-no. This is one thing that you as the wife are supposed to completely do 100%. And they also said, how can you trust those young girls with your children? But, I personally think that if I didn't do that, I would be so unhappy and dissatisfied if I had to stay home for, 5-6 years until they're in elementary school. And then if you're out of the business for so long, it's not feasible. Plus, I guess I had the advantage that I lived in different countries around the world. I was staying in France also for a while, then I was in China and the States, and I saw that in different countries it works, it's possible. Your children are not going to be completely handicapped, because somebody else is watching them for a couple of hours. So maybe I come to this scenario with a little bit more courage than a typical Japanese wife, for who this would be such a foreign idea.
Do you get any pushback from your in-laws? Mother-in-law,
Well,
for example?
Yeah, of course, my mother-in-law, she's a lovely lady, close to 80 now.
Okay.
And I think she would ideally see me as a stay-at-home mom. And what I found really interesting is that, she doesn't really want to limit me in my profession, but she also cannot understand why a woman even wants to work. Because in the classical Japanese ideal, your husband is something like a cow you send out to make milk, right? And then you as the wife...
This is a fantastic expression you've got there for the Japanese husband's role.
Isn't it?
Fantastic.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And, my mother-in-law actually told me once, now your job is to take care of the health of your husband. And, that already shows where you see your responsibilities. Because for her, I think the ideal scenario would be that, I take good care of my husband, my care is making the money, my husband is making the money, and, he's the cow that I send out, and I just milk the money out of that relationship, and in return, I take care of the house and the kids. So for her, this is also the best scenario for a woman. Why would a woman have to go out in that hostile business world and have that stress of being in the office, and so
battling it out with clients?
Exactly. So I can completely understand where she's coming from, and of course, the generation of today's young Japanese women also have those kind of mothers who don't want to do anything mean. They just want to make sure that they have the most comfortable life possible, right? And maybe the European education is a little bit different. We're not maybe looking for the most comfortable life, but for a life that is satisfying also intellectually. So of course, I could become a housewife, but I would say what a waste of resources and what a waste of investment. And yeah, I
didn't do
enjoy
your
working.
PhD to sit around at home, right?
Exactly. And also living in Tokyo is quite expensive, so you see that the realities are kicking in as well. For more and more Japanese people, it's not possible that the wife is just sitting at home doing nothing. So this is a little bit of the mismatch, that I think you see more Japanese women who also want to work, but then you don't get a place in the hoiken, in the childcare, and you still don't have the infrastructure to do the jobs that you want to do. And at the same time, culturally, I think for many Japanese people it would be difficult to do the scenario that I do. Because, having like a person that you don't really know come to your home and watch your children is definitely not something that many Japanese families would want to consider.
That only relatives would look after the
Exactly,
children.
yeah.
Strangers would never
Yes.
be given the children.
Yeah.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. So let's think about, I've asked you a whole raft of questions. We had a fascinating talk, I must say. Are there any questions about leading in Japan, doing business in Japan that I haven't asked you that I should have?
Well, I think we already talked about the fact that, as a woman, you're still somewhat of a rare
Novelty.
But I would encourage also your listeners and your viewers, if you're a woman, also a Western woman, you should not be afraid of the Japanese business environment. Because I actually find for a Western woman, it is wide open. And I haven't really experienced much discrimination at all. So as long as you have the skills, language definitely helps.
So when you talk about discrimination, what form would that discrimination take?
Sometimes you hear from the Japanese companies that even if you have the qualification as a woman, you're simply not getting promoted. I think those kind of things could happen if you're in a very Japanese traditional company. Or I just remember one time I was at a automotive customer of ours, and this was a very traditional guy. And he said to me, well, your Japanese is pretty good, but I think you should talk more like a lady and not like a man. Those kind of comments sometimes.
What did you say to that?
Oh, at that time I
was something like
was just
male
so
approach.
surprised that I would just smile and nod. And, I was it was an internship. I was 20 or so at that time, very young. But, but those are the extreme stories that you sometimes hear. I think nowadays, if you're a foreign lady in Japan, if you want to work in Tokyo, there are lots of great opportunities out there, and many companies are looking for people. And you're probably very well aware of that, but one of the big challenges also for companies nowadays is simply to get good people. And for foreign companies, even more so, because the highly qualified Japanese people, what they still prefer is, first of all, the large Japanese companies.
And also what their parents and grandparents prefer as well.
And their spouses, for safety reasons. Go to
cow into the right, nice stables.
Yes. Go to a big Japanese company. And then maybe comes the huge foreign companies that everybody knows. And then you have the Japanese medium-sized companies. And at the very bottom, you have all foreign companies that are not a household name. So I would say a lot of Western companies are looking for good people. And at the same time, even the innovative Japanese companies are now more and more needing foreigners because they see the Japanese market is shrinking, they have to go outside, they have to go international. So I think in both sides, you have lots of opportunities. And I think that Japan, despite all the challenges and the differences, is still a great place to work. And I have to say, so far, my colleagues and my clients and customers, 99% have been really lovely people to work with. So yeah, of course, the work can be stressful, but that's the fact in any country.
You know, listening to you,
Yeah.
you know, you have a PhD. You've been involved with Japan from a long time ago now, and you've lived here for a long time. Do you ever write about these things? Because, you know, listening to you, you have a great insight into things here, and you've also got a great expression about how you term things. I noticed it, and I was wondering myself, you know, do you ever write about business in Japan, in for example, in German, and get that published or push that out in social media or something? Because you've got very, very good insight.
Well, thank you. This is actually one of my plans also, because a lot of people have also given me that idea. They said, you know, you should definitely write a book. Because there are not that many people.
That too,
yes. And maybe also the combination, because you have a lot of Western men getting married to Japanese ladies, but not the other way around. So I think I could definitely bring like an interesting perspective to that discussion. It's definitely on my list. It's simply in the moment with the 2 kids and this job. It's very hard to, you know, make the time.
We'll get to that one.
We'll get to that. But thank you very much to encourage me one more time to consider this. Yeah.
And if we're going to give some advice to someone who's being sent to Japan by their company, or they're already just arrived, and you're going to give them some advice on how to succeed here in Japan, what would be some advice you'd give them?
Well, I think number one advice would be you have to learn the language. Because in many countries, you get along with English, but Japan, if you're in for the long term, you need the language.
But often they're not here for the long term,
Yeah.
you know, because of the tax situation here, 5 years and they're out, you know, because of the tax punishes you for staying longer than 5 years. So often, you know, they think, well, I'm going to be in Japan max 5 years.
Yeah.
Why would I bother?
Yeah.
So how do they get around that problem?
Well, if you don't have the time to learn, you need somebody who can interpret well for you. And I think there's a difference between just direct interpretation and really translating what the people mean. So sometimes what's happening is that you have a translator, interpreter who just tells you the words that are spoken, but doesn't put them into the context. You know, the classical example is you go to the customer and they say, oh, great product, we'll think about it. And the interpreter will not tell you that this means a no. Because if a Japanese customer is really interested, they will ask more questions. You know, those kind of, you know, cultural insights.
Or it's, they say it's going to be muzugashi.
Yeah.
And the translator says, oh, they said it's going to be difficult. Well, the correct translation
It's
is impossible,
Yes.
not difficult.
Yes.
And I found that dealing with Australians, you know, when I was on the import business from Australia, you tell the Australian exporters, oh, look, he said it's going to be difficult. And being Aussies, they're thinking, no problem.
Yes, exactly.
We'll find a way around
Yes.
it, you know.
Yes.
And then you realise, well, I can't say it's going to be difficult because they're getting the wrong message.
Yeah.
So I have to say to them, well, this is impossible.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
And that really stops them and they have to really think. So, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Or you also have to be careful how you communicate. Like one mistake that I often see with people who come from Europe, for instance, fresh off the boat, they want to use humor. They want to make jokes. And now if you try to have some ironic or sarcastic jokes in Japan, you know, you're going to drive your interpreter crazy because this is simply not translatable. So yeah, if you cannot speak the language yourself, you need to have a very good assistant or interpreter who can explain to you the backstory and, you know, communicate both your message correctly and that of the business partner.
So I think in that you're right. Idioms,
Yeah.
nightmare.
Yes.
Sporting references,
Oh my God.
another nightmare, you know. And so you've got to sort of eliminate these things from, and acronyms. You've got to just eliminate these from your vocabulary. And I said before, dealing with Australians, I realised, wow, we not only have the American idioms and the British idioms, we have our own unique idioms.
Yeah.
So poor old Japanese got no chance, you know. So yeah, that's always a problem.
Yeah.
What other some advice will we give some visitors arriving here to spend their 3 to 5 years in Japan?
Yes. So the second thing I think we already touched on is don't blame everything on Japan, because in any country you will have some challenges, and there is a lot of temptation to always blame it on Japan and generalize. If somebody is being unfriendly or inconsiderate, it's not necessarily because they're Japanese, maybe they're just a jerk. So I think it's very easy to blame it on the culture, even though it's not a cultural problem. And the third thing that I would say, which I also mentioned earlier, is that you have to pick your battles, what you're going to change in Japan. On the one hand side, I definitely see that there's potential and you have a unique position as a foreigner to maybe realize some ideas that the Japanese wouldn't be able to. Because you are the outsider, you're allowed to be different, you're allowed to overstep some of the traditional Japanese business customs. At the same time, the art of the possible, you have to make sure if what you want to do is actually feasible. So you should have somebody who's very familiar with the Japanese industry and at the same time maybe also ambitious enough to question that. Because of course, depending on your team, they might say, well, this is not possible in Japan, not possible in Japan. So you have to have somebody who knows both sides and who can be a consultant to you, what you can feasibly do.
Well, very, very, very good pieces of advice there. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
Well, thank
That's
you very much
great.
for that opportunity.
Yeah,
it's been very interesting.
Thank you. Well, this has been my great pleasure to have our first woman leader come on the program and talk about leading in Japan. So thank you very much for joining us for Japan's top business interviews, and please join us again for our next episode.